And hello everybody, welcome to another episode of AWS on Stack Overflow. My name is John Rotenstein. I'm a technical evangelist at AWS, and as a work/hobby thing, I like answering questions on Stack Overflow to do with AWS. And I invite you to join me today to go through a number of questions, learn a few things, provide some answers, and just have a bit of a community get-together. So I am located in Sydney, Australia, where it is Thursday at 11 a.m. It might be somewhere ahead or behind that, wherever you are watching us today. Hi, Jelly. Good to see you online. I've been seeing a lot of your answers online. It's great to hear. Where are you folks watching from? So feel free to drop in chat. Let me know where you're watching from, how you've been involved with Stack Overflow, and let's get going. So, a few things I wanted to do today. We'll go through and answer a number of different Ottawa, fantastic stratosphere. Woodstock, Connecticut. I think that requires a delve into Google Maps. Let's have a look here. Woodstock, Connecticut. Brazil. Whoa. Time in Brazil. If it's morning for me, it means you're about to go to bed. So thank you very much, Rakand One, for joining in here. Here is Woodstock, Connecticut. Just outside of Hartford and all that. Excellent. Welcome to the show. Great to have you. Time in Boston is 9 p.m. So hopefully you'll join us for a little bit. Lama is coming from Western Australia, where it's probably 2 hours earlier, about 9 a.m. And Mikami from Sydney. Good to have you, fellow people with me here in Sydney. So, as mentioned, I like to ask answer lots of good Stack Overflow questions. In fact, here's a little thing that I'm sort of proud of. If I go to my Stack Overflow information, it tells me how my reputation's going, how my badges are going, etc. I have answered, coming up to 5,000 answers online is what I've given there, which is pretty neat. But if I go to questions, how many questions have I made? 0. So, hey, R6, welcome, first timer from Florida, welcome along. So I don't ask many questions or any questions here on Stack Overflow, but I do like answering them. But I highly invite you to ask things, answer things as well. As we go through answering some questions, occasionally you'll see some good questions, occasionally you'll see some bad questions. And there's a great page here on Stack Overflow that's called How to Ask. And it gives recommendations about how to ask a good question. So I thought it's worth having a bit of a review of that before we dive into them. I like some of the advice here. Write a title that summarizes the problem. G'day, Quaffy. A lot of people put a generic heading on their questions. So let's have a look at some questions that are out there today on AWS topics. Elastic Beanstalk memory issue. There can only be one question on Stack Overflow with the same title. So you can't create two questions with the same title. So I'd say, hey, is there only ever going to be one question on Stack Overflow called Elastic Beanstalk memory issue, or can it be a little bit more specific? So a title is actually a very important thing to put on your topic, on your question, because it summarizes everything that's in there. In fact, the normal recommendation is you should write your question first, and at the very end, write your title so it can really summarize everything that's there. And the reason it's important is people like me scan through the list, look at the titles, and if we see a title that we might be able to help with, we'll jump in and answer it. So titles, very important. I will often go through and improve the title on questions if they're wrong. So quickly looking at this question, memory in my server is 1 gig. When I start the instance memory usage around 800, I'm getting memory errors, okay? HTOP is showing a lot of processes. I can spin up a larger instance. I'm curious to know why so many HTTP processes are running. So what I can do in here is say, why are so many HTTP processes running? So here I'm improving the question. And I can go in here and say, I have improved the title of the question. And even though I haven't answered it, I've improved the title, which might help other people to answer the question, to find the question and to answer it. So once you've gained enough reputation in Stack Overflow, you can start editing things like other people's questions. Pretend you're talking to a busy colleague and have to sum up your entire question in one sentence. Well, I personally don't like one sentence questions, but the title should be that one sentence summary. And here's that thing, write the title last. That's a good thing. Bad things. I'm confused about something good. Notice that the good answers here, the good titles, tend to be longer, which means they're more specific about things. Introduce the problem before you post some code. I sometimes see questions where they say, I'm having a problem with my for loop. And you go into the question and boom, it's a whole lot of code. And it's just code. And you have to sit there and figure it out. So don't just copy your entire program in. Only give us the bits of code that are necessary. There's this concept of a minimal, complete, verifiable example. And that means just give us enough code so we can reproduce the situation. We can see what's happening. Don't give us the entire program if the same problem can be summarized in a few lines of code. Include tags. Tags are a great way to identify questions. So when I search for questions, I search for Amazon and AWS related tags. So they're really good. And proofread before posting. I'm as guilty as anyone else. My typing is not perfect. I sometimes make mistakes, but more importantly, does what you're doing make sense as you're creating the question? So anyway, lots of good tips here for posting a question. Let's dive into answering a few questions. Who out there has answered some questions in the last week on Stack Overflow? I know Jelly has. Jelly's one of my best recruits answering questions online there. I've marked a few questions that I wanted to look at earlier. In fact, here's one I just saw come up in the list before I started. So, a user called Car they want to combine same files in multiple folders in one file in S3. I have multiple files in S3 folder. How do I combine them together using Boto3 Python? Ignoring header info. Ooh, that's different. Rakan, sometimes people are eager to show the code and get help. Yes, it's like, here's my code, what's wrong? In fact, I saw one of them just before where somebody said, I want to achieve this, here's my code. Can you help me? And it's like, well, are you not achieving it? Are you getting a particular error? Yeah. So this one's interesting. How can you combine files together in S3? I see a lot of questions from people asking, how can I zip files up? So you might have a whole lot of files in S3 and you want to create a zip file from them. This can be really useful because let's say somebody wants to download a package of code. Instead of downloading 100 files, it'd be great to zip up those files and download the one zip file. Can S3 do it? No. S3 is a storage service. It's getting smarter. Things like S3 Select let you query things in there, but it can't do things like zip or edit files. So there are some little cheats you can do to concatenate files together. I'll see if I can find this. Combine S3 files using copy part. So in S3, there's something called, I don't know if I'll find it. Copy an object using that. So when you copy things in S3, I can't find an example here. When you copy things in S3, if they're bigger than a certain size, like 5 megabytes, you do what's called a multi-part copy. And a multi-part copy says, okay, copy this chunk of the file, copy this chunk of the file, copy this chunk. You can do it as a multi-part upload or a multi-part copy. And it's quite interesting in that you can copy one file to another file. And you can actually say, copy this first file to a new file. But if you do it in multi-part format, you can then say, oh, also copy this file to that file, because the source of a copy for a multi-part copy can be multiple objects and multiple ranges of objects. So you can sort of cheat and combine files together by doing a multi-part copy from multiple existing objects. I was going to try and demonstrate that here, but what they want to do here is they want to combine the two files in one, which is possible, but they want to ignore the header in the second file. So unfortunately, that means you have to intelligently look at the file, and you can't quite do that. So, somebody's provided a bit of an answer here. Yes, so they're literally opening the first file, reading it in, then opening the second file and copying the headers. So I'm just going to put a comment here. What's the S3 API called copy apart? it's called copy part, upload copy part, copy object, copy part method. Copy part. Defines the parameters. Let's go into the copy object API documentation to see if I can find a reference for them. Copy object. Can't find it, so I won't put a link in there. To read in. Wouldn't have thought of using multi-part upload APIs to merge files. Yeah, so the copy part, I might have that command wrong, says copy from here to there, and you can have multiple sources for the copies, which can be different objects. It's really neat. And you'll need to process the files through your Python app. As J Quadrad is recommended. So much for that one. Oh, upload copy part. Thanks, Jelly. Let's have a look at that one. Upload part copy. It was something like that. Wonderful. Let's have a look at this. Uploads a part by copying from an existing object as a data source. That's exactly one. Thank you. And if we look at the API, it's a bit messy. You can specify the source, and you can even specify, I think, the range. Yeah, you can say just copy these parts of the file to somewhere else. So you can even pull out bits of a file and construct a new file as long as you're not editing it. So thank you. I will edit my comment to put in that specific thing. I just used a very nice plugin to do a copy. This little plugin here is called Markdown Copy, and I've got a link of it here on my bit.ly link, and it's a great way to copy URLs for pasting into Stack Overflow. So very good. Hey program. Let's see what other things we've got out here. So much to learn out here. I have bookmarked a few questions. Let's see what I've got out here. How to combine the same files. We have done that one. I can turn off the bookmark. CloudFormation scripting. Can someone guide me on how to create a CloudFormation template in YAML format? Yes. To copy, encrypt a shared private AMI from my AWS account. So does anyone think this is possible? Let's have a look. CloudFormation template to copy or encrypt a shared private AMI. So CloudFormation templates can be used to deploy infrastructure in your AWS account. You can say, create me a VPC, create me a subnet, create me a load balancer, an EC2 instance, etc. It creates infrastructure, but it doesn't do things like you can't enact a copy command. So while the CloudFormation template might use an AMI, it won't really trigger a copy. The shared AMI, what do they want to do anyway? Copy, encrypt a shared prompt. Are you encrypting, attaching, or storage? It's a shared custom AMI from another account that was shared with my account. The output AMI was built from the other account using Image Builder. EC2 Image Builder is something we released late last year, which helps you build AMIs, Amazon Machine Images. I just need help on how to create a CloudFormation template to copy and encrypt that shared AMI to me. So AWS CloudFormation can be used to launch infrastructure. I suppose anything is possible with Lambda. That might be cheating, says Draws with Kitties. Very true. Let's put that in as well. you could add a custom resource. Let's make it a Lambda custom resource. How to pronounce AMI? I saw a poll on this recently. Where did I see that poll? Somebody did a poll and AMI came out on top, but it depends where your audience is. I'm an AMI person. Is he asking to spin up EC2 instances with the shared AMI, then create the image? Sounds like he's wanting to grab an AMI from a different account. How to create or sample, copy and encrypt that AMI to me. It sounds like they want to create a copy in their own account. What's going on there? Not too sure. Hopefully we'll get some more information from them about that one. Anyone else? Yeoman says, having trouble reading AMI without saying AMA in their head. What's AMA stand for? Google, whoops, not Amazon. What is AMA? Australian Medical Association. I'm in Australia, so it defaults to something like that. Or there's IAMA, which of course is where the mundane becomes fascinating. IAMA stands for Ask Me Anything. So on Reddit, guests will come along, such as Jeff Barr, and say, hey, ask me anything. And you can go and do it. So might be that. Ask me anything. Oh, that's what you thought as well. Yeah. For those of you who haven't participated on Reddit of late, there's a couple of Reddit subreddits you might be interested in. One of them is the AWS subreddit, where, has anyone made the transition from AWS enthusiast to employee? The one thing that I've noticed about Reddit versus Stack Overflow is on Stack Overflow, your score is representative of the contribution you have made to the community. If you answer lots of questions and people give you the thumbs up, then you get a good score. Whereas here on Reddit, I've noticed that just putting in a link post to something, for example, here, AWS logging and monitoring strategy guide. So somebody's created a post here where all they've done is link to an existing article and they get 32 upvotes. So it's probably a very nice article. Lots of people have appreciated it, but you get points for just doing a link. Or here somebody's raised a discussion topic and they've got 56 points. So as somebody who's worked long and hard on Stack Overflow to get lots of points, I sort of get upset with Reddit in that you can get karma points just for posting a picture of a cat or something. So there's two things on AWS. One is on Reddit. One is AWS and the other one is AWS certifications, which is a chat area for lots of people doing their AWS certification. And you'll see lots of stories like this. I just passed my things. Here's how I did it. I left my job in April, so I had time to start doing my skills. That's great. Lots of people asking questions, how to study, what's the first step for going. Here's some good ways to learn it. So if you're looking at doing any of those certifications, by all means, pop along to Reddit. I didn't know Jeff Barr did an AMA, says Draw with Kittens. Yes, so it was a while ago. And he came on and you could ask anything. And we're actually trying to get some of them going again. So lots of people enjoy IAMAs, and having someone there to chat with and raise the questions should be quite good. So keep your eye on the AWS Reddit channel. We'll try and get some more IAMAs going there soon. Biraman, most people just upvote based on the title. So people get points, you're saying. So if somebody comes along here and they say, oh, congratulations, you passed the exam, I'll give you a point. Doesn't really mean much, but if some people like it, that's great. Is this the companion Twitch channel for Build? Says Apple G. I'm not sure what you mean there. Hello, Sangi Med as well. Hello, everyone out there. Welcome along to AWS on Stack Overflow, where we answer some Stack Overflow questions together. Let's see what else we've got here. Oh, this is one that I was playing around with this morning, so I thought I'd talk about it. I have a Python script that runs a Lambda job to move files from an unrestricted S3 bucket to a restricted S3 bucket as soon as those files have been uploaded. I have no idea why they want to do that, but that's their requirement. My original goal was a 50 gig file. This is now a 500 gig file. the Lambda container stops at 15 minutes and I'm only able to transfer 100 gig before the end of the timeout. So here's some of their code. They're using Boto3, which is the Python SDK for AWS. And they're calling the copy command. So a little bit like the question we looked at before, you can copy objects between S3 buckets by issuing a copy command, and it does not download and upload. So it doesn't matter about the bandwidth you've got up and down to the internet. S3 will copy between buckets, even between regions. If it's between regions, you will be charged for the data transfer price between regions. If it's within the same region, there's no data transfer cost for copying your objects. I've looked around, and the options would be use a ECS, Elastic Container Service Container, or use step functions. So the problem here, before we look at what some people said, is they've got an object in S3 that they want to copy elsewhere. And I did a bit of playing around this morning. For me, it's still my morning, so I did earlier today. And here's what I did. I launched an EC2 instance, and I created a, let's see if it's correct, a 50 gig file. Yep, it's around about 50 gig. I created a 50 gig file in S3, and I copied it up to S3, which, by the way, was running at about 300 megabytes per second, megabits. Hey, does anyone know what this means? If someone refers to an MIB, does anyone know what MIB? Megabytes? Not quite. Mebibytes, yeah, something like that. Let's try this. Wikipedia Meb. A mebibyte. Very good, Rex. You got it right. One is 1024, the other is 1000, but which is which? Correct, kitties? So this leads to endless amusement for people. Have you ever had the situation where you go and buy a hard disk and the hard disk says 500 gigs of storage, and you go and plug it in, and once it's initialized and all that, it has 480 gigs of storage, and you go, where's that other storage gone? The answer is it's in that rounding thing. So normally things that are a quantity of 1,000, like if you have I'm in a metric country, so if we have a gram, a kilogram is 1,000 grams. It's not 1024 grams, it's 1,000 grams. So you've got prefixes like kilo, mega, giga, tera, peta, and so on. But in the computing world, which likes powers of 2, it's actually 1024. So a kilobyte is not 1,000 bytes, it's actually 1024 bytes. And you might think it's minor, approximately equal, but it actually leads to about how much difference is that? 24 out of 1024 is around about a 2% difference. And this can add up to quite a lot of difference. In fact, if you go and you launch an EC2 instance, default, and we get to the storage section, here you'll see you are asking for the size. And this is written in GIB. So EBS volumes are typically generated in GIB. I say typically because I've seen some weird pricing things which combine both of them. So what it means is when you see the I in there, it's a guaranteed power of 2. And I love these names. There's the kibibyte, mebibyte, gibibyte, tebibyte, pebibyte, xbibyte, zebibyte, and the yobibyte. I've never heard of a yottabyte or a yobibyte before, but that's officially how you do them. So all of these different standards. If you search for it in Google, will show you a friendly convert tool. It's like Pokemons. I'm going to send my yottabyte to kill your xbibyte with 10 bonus points. Convert 10 megabyte to meb. You're saying Google can do this for me? Look at that. So if I have 10 mebibytes, it's more than 10 megabytes. They're talking about a 5% difference there. The French call bytes octets. So they have mol-col-tol. Mol-col-tol. That definitely sounds like a Pokemon there. Okay, we were somewhat distracted here. What were we doing? Okay, yes. I created a 50 gigabyte file, and I uploaded it to S3, And then what I did is I ran a command here, and I told it, AWS S3 command, I said, please copy the file from one bucket, which I called stack big 1, to stack big 2. And the 50 gig file took almost 3 minutes to copy across. I was quite surprised about that, because I often think, gee, S3 has got to be huge, it's got lots of bandwidth going. But I guess 50 gigs of data is pretty big. Now, when I copied that file, it doesn't just say to S3, please copy the file. In fact, I might still have the session up here. Oh, good, it's still there. So if I go and run that copy command again, what it's actually doing is it's copying in parts. So the Amazon S3 multi-part copy says, please copy this chunk, now copy this chunk, now copy this chunk. The AWS CLI is quite clever in that it can copy multiple chunks in parallel. So that's why you see it ticking over pretty well. But it's not like it says to S3, please copy this whole 50 gig file for me in one go. As a result, the CLI is sitting there having to do these commands saying copy chunk, copy chunk, copy chunk, copy chunk, which is why it takes time. So in the question, we'll come back to that in a sec. In this question, Run Thor was saying, hey, it takes me in 15 minutes, I can copy about 100 gig of content. Megramore, what's the schedule for this Twitch? Does anyone know? So I tend to do it, I've been doing it a few weeks now. For me, it's Thursday at 11 a.m. So basically this time each week, though I might be moving it one day earlier in future, because we've got the certification quiz show coming back in a couple of weeks, and I'll probably do that on the same day. If you don't know what the AWS certification quiz show, I'll just give a quick plug for that. YouTube, AWS CQ. If you search for AWS CQ on YouTube, you'll find the AWS Certification Quiz Show, where we come up with some sample questions you might find on an AWS exam. We bring in an expert who can join us answering the questions. And what I'll do is put a link here to this playlist in the chat for you. And we discuss the topics that might be found on these certification quiz show questions. So we're starting that up in the first week of June, basically 1 day and 1 hour earlier than you're watching whatever you're watching me right now. Okay, so the reason this Run Thor was having trouble was that they have to keep running this copy command to keep sending copy part, copy part, copy part command, rather than just saying copy the whole file for me S3. And that was timing out after a certain amount of time. If we have a look here, I'm still copying my 50 gig file. It's over halfway there, but it does literally take time to copy the file between the buckets. And their Lambda function was running out after around about 100 gig. So if my timing from before said it was taking about 3 minutes for 50 gig, what it might be is Lambda might be a little bit slower. I've never investigated the speed of a Lambda function when it comes to networking bandwidth, but I'll show you something interesting. When you launch an EC2 instance and you get this screen that says, what instance type do you want? You'll see this column called network performance. And network performance, if I get out of the way, is an indication of the network bandwidth that your instance has. And you'll notice that smaller instances, T2 micro, small, medium, etc., say low to moderate. Then you've got bigger instances, like here I've got all the newer generation T3 instances up to 5 gigabit. The newer generation machines definitely seem to be pretty good. Wow, I hadn't realized they'd all gone better. But the general rule of thumb is, here's a 12x large that gives you 10 gigabit. And here's a 16x large that gives you 20 gigabit. So the bigger the machine, the more network bandwidth you have. And the reason for that is back in the AWS data center, we have lots of host computers. And those host computers run different sized instances. So you might have one host computer that runs, let's go for a nice simple one here, an M5 or a T3. M5 or M5A, which is the AMD version of the chipset. So you've got a 24x large. If you run this instance type, you are taking up the whole host computer that is running on AWS. So you get all of the networking bandwidth on that machine. However, if you go for a 12x large, which is half the size of a 24x large, you only get 10 gigabit of traffic. And that's because the network card plugged in there that does 20 gigabit. And if you look back at some reInvent videos, you'll see why it's 20 gigabit. Sounds a bit non-standard, but AWS has made equipment that works on 20 gigabit. You'll only get half of that because we are running 2 instances of type M5A 12x large. So they share the total network bandwidth. We chop it down, make sure you're not impacted by a noisy neighbor, so you get only half of that bandwidth. And if we go smaller than that, you'll see that it says up to 10 gigabit because that's being divided even further. So yeah, 20 gigabit is amazing. Is there instance supports 40 gigabit? Asks B. Raman. 25 gigabit. So we do, 100 gigabit, here we are. C5's compute optimized N is a networking version. So yes, you can have machines using our Elastic Fabric adapter. The Elastic Fabric adapter is a remade network card that we have made for the instances to give extremely high throughput. However, if I remember this correctly, and the traffic that goes across an EFA will only work on the same VPC or subnet or something like that. And as soon as it leaves that subnet or VPC, it won't give you as much traffic. You'll also hear of something called placement groups. So placement groups are the ability to dictate where you get things on situated on AWS. Where do I have pretty pictures here? So there are different types of placement groups. A cluster placement group is a logical grouping within a single AZ. Can span peered VPCs. Here we are. Enjoy a higher per flow throughput of up to 10 gig. So what this means is if you have several instances that do a lot of chatter between each other, and this is very common with cluster computing, what do you call that? Really fast computing where lots of machines work together. Somebody will put the word in the chat. Where they're all working together and having to share data very fast. A placement group effectively guarantees distributed computing, sort of. EPA, clusters. The word will come to me eventually out of my glacier brain. By putting them in the same placement group, we will literally locate them in the same rack back in AWS land. HPC, thank you. Thank you, Umpsian. High performance computing. Define HPC. High performance computing, use of parallel processing for running advanced application programs efficiently, quickly, etc. Very big in scientific research. And so if you want lots of computers located together, put them in a cluster placement group, puts them all in the same rack so they talk very fast. There is an alternative called a partition placement group. And this reduces the likelihood of correlated hardware failures for your application. So the way it works is you define multiple partitions. You can then launch bits of your application in bits of them. So you might have 3 application servers, for example, and you put each of them in a separate partition. And that guarantees that if one partition, let's say one rack in the data center or something, fails, then it won't impact all of the services. So it's the opposite of a cluster placement group, which wants to put them all together. This one guarantees separation of the instances. But within that partition, you can then put multiple things. So you might put your web server, your app server, and a database replica in the same partition, but then keep multiple copies in other partitions. Kitty says, wow, so you can control how your instances are distributed physically. Yes, either to make them faster together or intentionally further away. It's all about speed versus failure type things. So the first one we looked at, which gave the highest speed, which was the cluster placement group, is more susceptible to failure because something can go wrong and all of them die at once, which is a good trade-off for speed, but for production you normally want to partition. Or we have another option here called a spread placement group, a group of instances that are placed on distinct racks, with each rack having its own network and power source. Recommended for applications that have a small number of critical instances that should be kept separate from each other. I'll give you an example. What's that distributed database? Not Mongo. Mongo? No. The database that you spread lots of things across multiple servers and have them together. And we just released Cassandra. Thank you. There is now a managed Cassandra service available on AWS. So Cassandra has multiple nodes and it has replication between the nodes. So if one of the nodes fails, it can reconstruct the lost data from the other servers. And it actually uses instance store to store the data, which is really fast, directly attached, but it means if an instance dies, then the whole instance fails. So this is a great way to intentionally put things on different machines. So if there is a problem, they don't all die at once. Aurora. So Amazon Aurora is our reimagined database for the cloud, where the front end is either PostgreSQL or MySQL, but the back end is a new type of data storage. And yes, we do intentionally distribute the data across multiple machines, across availability zones in S3 as well. Biraman, you're saying, hey, is this live stream recorded? You should be able to watch them for a while on Twitch. I've also been uploading the episodes to YouTube, so you should be able to watch these. I don't expect people to come along and riveting watch an hour or two of Stack Overflow questions, but it's really handy if you ever want to go back and see something we talked about. So, how did we talk about partition groups here and all that? So, oh, that's right. The speed of throughput of your EC2 instance is a factor of the size of your instance. The bigger the instance, the bigger the throughput. And a placement group could also impact the speed that you're using. There is also that EFA, that Elastic Fabric Adapter, can also increase the speed of your instance that are going there. So, Jelly is suggesting set default S3 multi-part chunk size to 5 gig. Will that increase the speed? Ooh, I like that. AWS CLI chunk size. Let's see what the documentation is. Configuration credential file setting. Ooh, multi-part chunk size. Specifies the chunk size the CLI uses for multi-part transfers of individual files. Default is 8, minimum 5. If it exceeds blah, blah, blah. So let's go to that EC2 instance. That took us, oh, that was interesting. This time I copied between the buckets and it took real time of 3.5 minutes. Last time it took under 3 minutes. So there's a bit of variability even in what's going on in S3. So let's experiment. AWS configure set default S3 multi-part chunk size. Makes me want to have some chocolate bars or something with some chunky things. 5 gigabytes, gigabytes, who knows? And I'll run that copy again. So as it sends commands to S3 to say copy a part for me, this suggests that it will be saying choose larger chunk sizes. And it will only give us a result when it's finished. So we'll come back to that. Is time a built-in Linux command or instances, or is a package you downloaded? It's a standard Linux thing. So here's another machine where I was trying to create a 500 gigabyte file, and it looks like it's died in trying to do so. Let's see if I manage to get that to work. Here is, oh yeah, I got a 500 gig file, and I was going to copy it up to S3, but of course it would take a long time to copy there. So time, if I say time, how long it takes me to list my directory, you'll see it gives that time. So you just stick time in front of any Linux type command and we'll go and do it quite nicely. So if I say time sleep for 5 seconds, it sleeps for 5 seconds and it should come back with a real time of around about 5 seconds. Yay! So it's a great way to test how fast things are running for you. Oh, how lovely. It started raining here in Sydney. Lovely winter anyway. Okay, coming up to about 3 minutes. That should be copied there. Also, I saw a really interesting talk on YouTube by James Sayowini. Now, James will come up later on as we discuss things today because James invented something called JMESPath. You might be familiar with JMESPath because it powers the query parameter in the AWS CLI, and I thought we'd have a play around with that a little bit later today. And so James is an amazing developer at Amazon, and I was watching this presentation he has. I'll put a link to it in the chat. And this presentation was looking at how can you copy 1 billion files, really small files, so only 100 bytes each. But how do you do them? Obviously, you want to do them in parallel. You want to make use of all your processes and things. And if you're a Python person, it's quite interesting because he goes into threading, multiprocessing, async IO that I've never really played with, and he combines them all together and manages to reduce a job that could take more than a month, something like 34 days. He gets down to just a few hours to copy 1 billion files. So that's the sort of thing that people running the creating the AWS CLI, creating S3 for you have to think about. How do you cope with billions of files? It's quite amazing. Okay, how did our result here go? Whoa! Excellent, thanks for that, Jelly. So we managed to cut down from our random thing. Previously it was 2 3/4 minutes. Now it's about 3.5 minutes. And that one cut down to about 2 minutes. So it looked like the larger chunking was good, probably because of the overhead taken in each of those API calls to say start this chunk, stop this chart, stop. So that ran much nicer. What other things do we have here in the AWS CLI config file? It's about time that I read some of these. Addressing style. This is the controversial change that is coming up to S3 buckets. This guy's a hero. He's been with AWS for a while. Yeah, James Sayowini. I only knew of him because of JMESPath, but he's done some fantastic things. And if you even just go out there in YouTube, I can't spell his name. Let's grab his name off here. Sayowini. Do a search for him on YouTube. Downloading 1 billion files, PyCon, debugging. Oh, here's that async IO stuff 3 years ago. So yeah, a true legend. Oh, and he also did, he often does presentations at reInvent about the AWS CLI. So really good presentation. If you like the AWS CLI, have a look at all of the reInvent AWS CLI sessions that are out there. One is introducing the CLI version 2, which has some really neat stuff in there. Thank you, my doggy, who is barking at the rain outside. Lots of really interesting stuff out here. So the addressing style, we are making a change to S3 where we are going to ask you to please refer to, when you have a URL to your bucket, please put the bucket name up front instead of saying S3 amazon.com/bucket name. And the reason for that is documented in a blog post. AWS blog S3 bucket name URL style. I don't know, I'll find it somewhere. The S3 path deprecation plan. I'll put that in the chat. This tells you a bit of a story of why we're doing it, but it basically allows us to scale and do things a lot better when delivering S3 files to you. Lots of people complain when my dog is a CLI fan. Yeah. He likes the chunk size. A lot of people complain when we said we're going to make this S3 change, so we then extended it to have a longer lead time. But I think support for the path style model ends on. We originally pushed it out to more time, but at some stage you won't be able to create any new buckets. Won't be able to use the old addressing style, basically. Payload signing, dual stack endpoint, which is our IPv6 that we discussed the other week. Accelerated endpoint, the AWS acceleration, what's the official name? The Global Accelerator and S3 Transfer Accelerator. They're slightly different. S3 Transfer Acceleration can be used to speed up your transfer over long distances. Basically, instead of, let's say you are located in Woodstock, Connecticut, and you want to send something to the S3 bucket in Sydney, instead of going across the internet and then hitting the S3 bucket, if you use transfer acceleration, we will redirect your domain name to a close location, close to Woodstock, Connecticut, go across the AWS network that's in many places and really fast, and deliver it to S3. So there's a charge involved, but it will do a lot faster. I believe you can also use it to download content. So data arrives at an edge location and is routed to the S3 over an optimized network path, which is really neat. Maximum bandwidth. That's great. So you can say copy up to S3, but only use a certain maximum amount of bandwidth so you don't kill my other stuff going on. Oftentimes people say, how can I back up my stuff to S3? And we say you can just use the CLI to copy. Make sure you have enough bandwidth, so do it at night. But you don't want it chewing up the whole bandwidth, which might kill off any batch jobs you've got going. So concurrent request is great. Chunk size, threshold, fantastic. The threshold is when it says, at what point should I start using multi-part upload? And there's a limit where you have to start using multi-part upload. So that's what you can control. Okay, we've spent a lot of time here. Somebody's come back to me on another question. Oh, look, the question we were looking at before. So this little basket up here on Stack Overflow allows me to, it tells me when somebody has commented or modified one of the questions that I've been involved in. In this case, I went before and said, do you wish to copy the AMI every time it's launched or just use it? And it says, okay, so Lambda function will do the copy action, as I understand, and not the CloudFormation itself. I just need a ready template for me to encrypt the shared AMI to my account that was not encrypted yet after it was shared from the other source account. Marcin, my other friend from Perth, you can't do this, CloudFormation. There's no ready template for that. Have to develop a custom resource. Happy with that? Marcin, you watching us now? Have to figure out what your Twitch ID is there. Okay. Oh, that's the one we were looking at, moving a large file between servers. I can get rid of that. More S3. So for those of you who have just joined us, my name is John Rotenstein. I'm a technical evangelist at AWS, and we are answering Stack Overflow questions, having a general chit chat, barking at dogs, that sort of thing. So this person wants a bucket policy to whitelist a specific IAM role. Remind me afterwards. I will, in fact, let's do that now. I will happily fix their spelling, specific, and I will therefore capitalize. Anything else I want to edit in this question? Maybe a bit of formatting. Oh, they're using the nice quote style. Looks good to me. Update some formatting. Okay. I have a bucket policy. It looks like that. What I want is, if the S3 object has a tag with key value status infected, so maybe something has gone through, done a virus check, and has marked suspicious objects as status infected, then restrict access to the public unless you are using a particular IAM role that looks like he's using for, he or she, they, are using to access an ECS container, a Shishmax. So any system container which assumes this IAM role should be able to access the bucket regardless of what tag the object has. I've seen my tasks assume the role. I've used a wildcard. Okay, my ECS tasks are getting a 403 access denied when trying to download the objects. Let's have a look at the policy. So this policy is saying allow anyone to get an object from this bucket. Fair enough. So that's effectively making the bucket public. You've also got to turn off block S3 public access to make that work. Then there's another deny. I hate deny policies. I'll tell you one in a sec. Saying deny get object on that bucket when there is a tag. I've never done this before. There is an existing object tag called status, which has a value of infected, and the source ARN of the request is not an assumed role. So I don't know about you, but negatives always hurt my head. There ain't nothing wrong with, I can never figure it out. So we've actually got lots of negatives here. We've got a deny policy that overrules an allow policy. We've got a not like that says when it is not this role and it is infected, then deny. Can anyone see an easier way to potentially do this without having to combine it all? So the tips I normally like to give are that a bucket policy should be used to grant access to public or very large groups of people. So this is an excellent example of when you should use a bucket policy. Allow everyone to get an object from this bucket. A bucket policy is not a great way of saying grant access to a particular role. How should you grant access to a particular role? You should go into the role itself in IAM and grant that role permission to access the bucket. So this person's caused a bit of a problem by using a deny, by saying deny access to this object. They then have to say, oh, unless you're this role. I think what we can do is turn this around and say, let's create a bucket policy that allows you to get any object that does not have a tag of status infected and allow that role to access the bucket without even mentioning the tag. So I gave that as a suggested answer in here earlier, but I didn't actually try it. So I'm suggesting that they create a bucket policy that grants access to non-infected objects, and you put a policy on the IAM role. Now we know that will work. I've never played with this, so let's see if this will work. Let's see if we can create a bucket policy that gives access to all objects except for those with a particular tag. Has anyone tried this sort of thing before? Do not try this at home without proper medical supervision. Oops, I've got my S3 console over here. And may as well use this. No, I'll create a new bucket. Let's create a new bucket. I'll create a bucket. Stack Woodstock. It's going to be our bucket of the day. I'm going to modify the block public access because I will be granting access through some bucket policies. It's always dangerous, so you have to acknowledge, yes, I might be releasing secrets to the world. Many companies search for such buckets and go mad at you. You're trying at home, great. D2 result, see if you can do it faster than me, and then you can tell me what I'm doing wrong with my own code. So we now have a number of buckets. Let's go to Woodstock. And let's upload an object into here. Those of you who've been watching me before know I have a fascination for cheese. Let's see if I've got some cheese in here. We'll do some Leiden cheese this time. Isn't Leiden in the Netherlands? Leiden. I went to the Netherlands a number of years ago, and the thing nope. Leiden. Oh, Netherlands, there it is. Leiden, Netherlands. They spell it slightly. It's got a tiger? What's in Leiden? It's temporarily closed, so don't be alarmed. The whole city is temporarily closed. I just remind you to delete a bucket I was using for fun. Yes, when you're creating buckets, it's very dangerous. I have a script actually that in all my class demos, what I used to do is whenever I create a bucket, I would call it something cheese. So it might be Jarlsberg cheese or something like that. And I have a script every night that goes and deletes the contents and deletes the bucket if it ends with -cheese. So it's a nice way of doing temporary buckets. So always name your buckets in some way and have a script to delete them at night. So here in the Netherlands, we have Leiden. And the thing I loved about the Netherlands is all the cities are named after cheeses. Edam. So here we have Edam in the Netherlands, which is really neat. Lots of great things. So I think any country that names their cities after cheeses will be a fan of mine. Okay, so we have Leiden cheese. And if I go to that object, let's just verify that it, first of all, is not public yet. If I open the URL, it says access denied, and that's because we have not got a bucket policy on here that allows it to be public. Carnivore. Oh, I like that name. Don't they need a bucket name in the policy? Let's have a look at their policy. So they did have, this brings up the lovely topic of confusion for everybody. When should you put the /* in the command? So the basic rule is anything that works on the bucket, you should refer to the bucket name itself, such as, I've got to figure out which ones they are, some of them, and other ones are to do with the contents of the bucket, such as getting an object, and that's to do with the /*. So get object is definitely /*. I'm always confused about upload because you upload to a bucket, but you can also upload to a path, so that uses one of them. And personally, I just put both in because that always fixes it, but the policy editors will do it for you. You can use tags for your script also, right? Says Megramore. I'm hoping to do it so we can do things in tags. So you're saying list, Jelly's saying the list stuff. What are we saying here? For the bucket list actions defined by S3. Oh, okay. So some of them say here it uses an object access, well, bucket. So here's a sample for bucket. Create bucket, of course, has to be done on a bucket. Let's try and find some others. Delete a bucket is on a bucket. Oh, okay. Delete bucket website. So if you're telling S3 to create the static hosted website, you do that to the bucket. Whereas if you're doing things on the object, then you'll typically need the /* to be within there. So let's add a bucket policy. Properties. No, I want to do a go to my bucket. So what are we doing here? We've created a bucket. I want to make the bucket publicly accessible to everyone except if an object has a particular tag on it. So we'll go into the permissions of the bucket, add a bucket policy, use the built-in policy generator. Whoa, whack that down a bit. I'm going to do an S3 bucket policy. I'm happy for anyone to get object on my bucket, ARN AWS S3 3:. S3 has unique bucket names for any bucket, so you do not need to provide the account number or the region, which is why there's two blank things there. I always say to myself 3:, and this is stack_wood/star. Add the statement, generate the policy. This is now saying, please allow anyone to get object from this particular bucket. I copy that, close the window, paste it in here, and say save. And it's gone mad at me for my bucket name or something. The bucket settings prevent granting public access. I thought I changed that. Let's have another look. They should have been the other way. Very confusing with those buttons. So I am turning off blocking by the bucket policy, but I'm allowing blocking from the ACLs that I don't need for the moment. I'm very sure this could be a dangerous operation. I then go back and paste that bucket policy, say save, and it worked. So now if I go back to my Woodstock picture and refresh, we can see this lovely laden cheese. How lovely. So everything is now public. Let's upload another file so we can try two different. Oops, shouldn't have gone back. We'll upload another cheese that we want to block. Live coding here, we might fail. Try it yourself. We'll do the cat carrier. A cat carrier. And we will go in here and say, cat carrier, I want to set a tag on you. Properties. Tags. Add a tag. What was the question saying? They wanted status is infected. Status infected. Tags are case sensitive, which can be somewhat annoying when you don't expect it. So status with a lowercase s is different to status with an uppercase s. Little tip there. Okay, and we want to now modify the policy so that our cat carrier, what is a cat carrier, you might ask? A cat carrier very handy when you want to carry your cat around. I found cats don't respond too well with love lines, with leads, so you can get your cat carrier. A little bit painful for the cat, but that's their problem, isn't it? I'm not a cat person. So we now want to modify the bucket policy. Let's give this a try. Go back to the bucket. Permissions, bucket policy. How are we going to do this? I'm going to steal some of their code on the assumption that it worked. Oh, sorry, Draws with Kitties. You can be the cat fan for our show. So, allow get object on the condition that string not equals. I don't know if this will work. If there's an existing object status tag called infected, then Invalid JSON. Thank you very much. Open, open, open. I probably missed a close bracket or two. Another close bracket. Yes. So allow get object from Woodstock as long as, I'm hoping this will work, the existing object status tag is not infected. What do you think? Will this work? Let's give it a go. Laden cheese. This is the one with, no, this is the one that was okay. So if I refresh, it has worked successfully. If I go back to our cat carrier and we open up this link now, it has denied. Let's verify that's working. Yes! Worked first go. I'm impressed. So used to having failure here. So let's copy that out and give it to the question here. Yay, thanks Jelly. So let's copy this policy. I will now edit my question. I no longer have to say, I suspect in the bucket policy, you should use not string equals check for the tag. And now let's put a sample in. When you're putting things in Stack Overflow, I like doing it this way. It's a fencing mark, 3 backticks, and a hint as to the format of the data. Paste it in and close it off. And we'll just clean this up a bit. We don't need a random statement ID. Allow non-infected maybe. And added policy. Fantastic. So that's really neat. So the nice thing now is if they use this allow, it does exactly what they wanted in that it will grant access, public access to an object as long as it does not have that tag. And then they can, and it does not impact the use of a role to be able to access the object directly. Let's do a final test to make sure that we are actually doing this correctly. Let's go back to the cat carrier. Prove that it is access denied, which it is. Let's go and remove the tag. Properties, tags. We'll just change it to infected 2. Refresh. And it works. So very nice. We are experts here. Thank you, Denka Gerbs. Yes, the way to become an expert is just to try stuff. We are now, I didn't know there was a condition that lets you control access to a tag on an object. That actually makes it really, really powerful. So you could grant certain groups of users access to certain objects based on tag, which is great. I leaked my bucket name. Bucket names are public, so I'm not too worried about bucket names being out there. But I'm making sure that none of my buckets tend to be public, and the ones that are public do not give list permissions. So thanks for caring about me in there. I will, however, delete that bucket because I don't want to be blamed for having publicly accessible stuff in there. So I'll go and say stack Woodstock, delete the contents for me. Buckets must be empty, and it won't let me type in here. We're gradually improving the design of the S3 console. Why not one that lets me type in there and delete the bucket? Let's try it a different way. AWS S3 remove bucket, stack Woodstock, force, which I think deletes objects in the bucket. Bucket gone. I think I got the ACL versus bucket policy questions in my Cloud Practitioner exam wrong, says Kitties. So, quick revision. An ACL is on the access control list, which is on the individual objects themselves, whereas let's go to another bucket. Big ones that I was playing with before, whereas a bucket policy applies to the whole bucket. So it's interesting to hear that they had that level of questions on the Cloud Practitioner exam. So I should mention that, Cloud Practitioner. Our next episode of the CQ, the AWS Certification Quiz Show, will actually be about Cloud Practitioner. So I've been making some sample questions to go on there. And Cloud Practitioner is a fairly high-level certification, just to say, yes, you generally understand the benefits of the cloud and some of the terminology, and you know some of the services. So what is the cloud, basic infrastructure, value proposition? It doesn't go in depth into too many services. So I'm quite surprised that by the way, it is not allowed for you to reveal the contents of your certification exam. So kitties, let's just assume that you are worried that you might get it wrong on a certification exam rather than you did. But if a question had it, I'd be surprised that it has such detailed things such as ACLs and bucket policies on a cloud practitioner exam. Architecting level exam I could understand, the associate level exams, but for cloud practitioner, that's pretty deep. Okay, how are we going here? Trust me, skip cloud practitioner, go straight for SA associate. So ZD, thank you. A lot of people say to me, which exams should they go for? Let's see if we can come up with a list of all the certifications out there. If you can do an associate exam, then by all means do an associate exam. If you are a little bit worried, then go ahead and get the cloud practitioner exam. The cloud practitioner exam was the first one that we offered online, where you could do it proctored online. But now with COVID, our other exams are now apparently, or at least the associate ones, are available for you to do online with somebody watching you. I even heard somebody saying they were thinking about the questions like this, and the person watching them said, please remove your hand from your mouth, because they might be whispering to somebody else or asking for hints. They ask you to put a camera around the room to make sure no one else is there, that type of thing. So highly recommend you do the associate level. My typical hint, I think I've given this before, is if you've gone and done the solutions architect exam and you went acceptably well with that, turn around, go straight back in the exam room and do the SysOps exam, because they cover 80% of the same content. SysOps is a bit more low level, architecting is a bit higher level, but you should be able to pass it. Developers a bit harder, covers databases and API calls and things like that. And the professional exams that go for 3 hours, my hint there is always go to the bathroom beforehand. They're quite detailed, and make sure you've been using AWS in anger for a while before you go for a professional level exam. But the cloud practitioner, most of you watching this show should just be able to walk in and do it straight away. Let me know how you go when you go ahead and do it. Okay, back to some more questions. We have answered that one. I'm very happy for that. Thank you, Ashish Max, for sending in that question. We have marked that one off. What's this one I marked earlier? I'm trying to find the best solution on an API that I'm developing. Basically, in my API, I store images on S3 private buckets. And in the private buckets, I need to be displayed on a mobile app. I have two solutions that are not the best. Send images in base 64. The problem is I need to change the app to read base 64 images, or access the private bucket, authenticating in-app using S3 credentials. The problem being not secure, exposing the credentials. And I put a clarification question on here earlier. So this is quite common. You have a mobile web app and you want that app to be able to access content in S3, but you don't necessarily want the content to be public to the whole world. So how can you make that content only accessible to your app? Maybe you're, you've got a Yelp type app and you've got some graphic elements you want to put in there, picture of a restaurant or something like that. You want to show it in your app, but you don't want other bots coming along and scraping it from your S3 bucket. Or sometimes you might be developing an app and you want to have private content. R6 signed images, indeed. You might want to have private content that is only accessible to one person. So let's say you are Instagram, you might have some private photos in Instagram. Does Instagram have private photos? I don't know. And you only want to show those particular photos to the correct users that are there. Pre-signed URL is the way to go, Jelly. I tend to agree with you. So let's look at the first case. If Marco here wants to make content available to the apps from S3 without having users log in, so it's not specific, how can you do that? And it is correct, you should not bake in your S3 credentials in an application. Users can come along, reverse engineer your application, extract your access key, secret key, and even though it might be locked down to only read-only access, you don't want that happening. So never bake in credentials. Instead, what you can do is you can use mobile app security token service. See if I can find some pretty pictures. I love the Google image search here. Yeah, this is sort of what we want. Doesn't have to use Cognito though. So Cognito is an authentication service specially designed for mobile apps, though you can use it for web apps as well. But it also makes use of the Security Token Service, otherwise known as STS, and that's the key to this type of thing. So let's look at the flow of how this application would normally work. If they want to grant access to a private data in DynamoDB to a web app, how do you do it? So somebody starts using the app. They authenticate to the app. So that could be authenticate to your database. Here it's login with Amazon. It could be authenticate against Google, whatever. So there is some identity that is ascertained. It then makes a call off to Cognito to say, hey, can you please give me an ID token for this user? And Cognito can then go off to the security token service and generate a set of temporary credentials. Now, if you've used roles assigned to EC2 instances, you've already seen temporary credentials. Let's take a look at that. I have my EC2 instance I created earlier for looking at the size of copying files. And I have a role assigned that I call my ops role. I have a role assigned to this EC2 instance. And in fact, I will do something slightly safer because I'm about to show keys and all that, and I don't want to reveal my keys. So I will create a new IAM role for EC2. And do I want to create a policy? No! I'm going to put no policies whatsoever on this role. No permissions. I go through to my instance, change the IAM role. In the old days, this was not possible. When you launched an instance, you chose the role. But now it is possible to change the role immediately, which is fantastic. So, I'm still logged in, which is great. I can go to the magic metadata URL, curl http 169.254. What a 169.254 latest version of the API metadata. And it comes back and says to me, what information do you want to get? I'll say I want to get my identity credentials. So I will tag that onto the end of the command. It's saying you are using some, nope, that's the wrong one. I want to use my IAM. It comes back with security credentials, which I will tag to the end of that URL. It says I'm using something called no permissions. I will tag that to the end of the URL. It just looks a bit funny because it scrolled across my screen. But the full URL that I just said was latest metadata IAM security credentials, no permissions. It comes back with this. It comes back with an access key. I'm okay showing this to you all on a stream because there are no permissions associated with this role. It's giving you an access key. The AS in the beginning says it is a temporary key. The secret key, which I'm revealing because it has no permissions, authorizes me to use it, and a temporary set of access keys has this thing called a security token, which is, I think, an encrypted set of the permissions that I'm allowed to use. And it expires in around about, 8/21/21. When does it expire? In 6 hours. So it expires in 6 hours. So this is a form of temporary security key generated by the security token service. So going back to Marco's question here, a good way to do it would be the application would talk to a backend. The backend would say, oh, I need to generate some credentials for the mobile app. It can generate these temporary credentials with a limited lifetime, say 30 minutes of usage. It can then send the credentials back to the mobile app. And you can assign permissions to those credentials to say you can access the S3 bucket. So let's try this. So the mobile app should call AWS STS. Let's put a link in there. Which action is it? It would be sort of assume role. Yeah, it could be an assume role, or it could be gets. Let's do an assume role. Or it could be with web identity. They're not quite that. Oops, I'll copy a nice link. Use the AWS security token service. Using assume role. Oh no, it can't be assume role because we need to give it, oh no, that role could have predefined things. Can't spell. Is there live coding? I was going to do some live coding jelly around JMESPath. We'll do some playing with JMESPath. It's around about time, so we'll finish this off and then have a play with it. Send it to regular the mobile app. The flow for that would be users authenticate. The app should generate a pre-signed URL. They have a shortcut for doing that. 3 pre-signed URL. I think I'll leave it at that. No doubt be some follow-up questions from there. So, lots of fun there. Anything else I want to cover here? Schemas, backup, tree structures, MFA, Is STS like cause policy for mobile? So I'm not big into cause type things. So a cause policy is a result of very clever people trying to hack things around in browsers. So if you go to, if I go to your website, cheese.com or something, and you want to steal my Facebook credentials, you could open up an iframe, go to Facebook, hope that I'm already logged into Facebook, and then use the DOM, the web browser DOM, to navigate to that iframe, pull out some secret data from the Facebook frame, and then send it back to your website. So that's my understanding of cause. It's designed to stop people doing cross-origin resource sharing. If bits of a web page are coming from different places, don't let them talk to each other. And you can use a cause policy to override that and put one in here. I thought they came with a standard one. Where you can say, no, I'm happy, please allow another application to retrieve my my thing. So here is a typical cause configuration that is saying, yep, allow this origin to put, post, get whatever things from my bucket. STS is a way of generating temporary credentials. So when you use an IAM role on an EC2 instance, it generates temporary credentials, give those credentials to the application. The application or the AWS SDK can pull them out and then access then use that role. Another example is when you want to give the mobile phone things, you say, here's some temporary credentials, go for it. Another way is, and I actually had a question on this, to do with MFA. So multi-factor authentication is when you want to put that little security device on your AWS account and say, to be able to log in, you have to provide those 6 digits code when you're logging in. And somebody here is saying, is there a way to access cross-account with MFA enabled? So AWS credentials don't have an MFA because obviously when an application wants to use it, they're not going to stop and go, hey, human, can you please enter your MFA code? So what happens if you have some credentials that, let's say, to delete a bucket, you require MFA authentication? How do you provide it in? And the answer is you've got to assume your own AWS STS doc. Let's go back to that. There is a very interesting command here. Instead of assuming a role, you can say get session token. And get session token creates a temporary set of credentials, but it's based on your own login details. So you say, I am John. I want to create a temporary set of credentials based on what I can do, but please scope it down so it actually has less permission. I only want to be able to access that bucket or make this particular call. And when you make this get session token call, you can specify an MFA value. So the way you would make an API call that requires MFA is you would call get session token on your own IAM identity, provide it the MFA code, so you'll have to type it in, and then it will return you a set of credentials that is authenticated for a period of time with the MFA active. And if all of that seems like too much trouble, there is this particular question that I'll put in chat. Oh, that's not the question. Where did the question go? It was this one. No. Too many screens. And somebody has pointed out there is a very interesting project on GitHub, which will automate a lot of that for you. So you can just run this command, AWS MFA, duration 1800 is 30 minutes, and saying, please use this particular MFA device on my credentials. It then says, oh, what is your MFA code? And the human comes in and types in their code, and then it comes back with a set of credentials that you can use. So it's a nice, easier way of doing it. Same with assuming a role. So it's a handy bit of code you can use there. Whew. Let's take a break. So I promised earlier talking a little bit about JMESPath. So what is JMESPath? JMESPath is by James Sayowini, a fantastic guy at AWS who does lots of fancy things with Python, etc. I'm sure he's been instrumental in doing a lot of the AWS CLI that is written in Python, uses Boto. Also working at Amazon is a fellow called Mitch Garnett. Excuse me for getting his spelling wrong. Oops, that's our internal phone call. You should find him on the internet. Here he is. And Mitch actually created the Boto library, which is the AWS SDK for Python. And he did such a good job of creating Boto that we then hired him, it seems. And he's no longer working on that, but he's a principal engineer at AWS. So people like Mitch and, aren't they pretty? People like Mitch and James do great things to help it out. So JMESPath is used on the AWS CLI when you use the query parameter. What do we mean by that? Let's cancel out of a few things and figure out what I'm talking about. So I can go here and say AWS EC2 describe instances. And in the AWS CLI, it comes back with a whole lot of interesting information. Scroll to the top. It's saying there's a number of reservations, which contains instances, and then all the information in there. A reservation is a group of launches. So if you launch an EC2 instance, you can say, launch me 3 instances with these details. So that's one reservation that contains 3 instances. So reservations contain instances. And if I want to get the instance type of all these instances, I can say reservations instances instance type. So I can run that command again and say query reservations instances. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to paste in. I want to do, instances is an array, so I've got to put the square brackets after that as well. Instance type. So if I run that, it will come back with, for each of those instances, instead of returning me all of JSON, it will selectively pull out bits of the JSON that is there. So really, really great. Another example, sometimes people want to write code that loops through regions. So you can say AWS EC2, I think, describe regions, that will come back with a big list of regions. Let's say you just want to get this sort of value, which is region name, and it's contained in something called regions. I can say query regions region name, and it comes back with just that particular code. This is in JSON format. I can then say to the CLI, output it for me in text, and it will give me the same information. Oh, I've discovered a little hack. If it gives you tab separated elements like this and that annoys you for your scripting purposes, I've found that you can actually put the output parameters in square brackets, and that will result in forcing everything to a separate line. So this has now gone off, got a list of all active regions in my account. It doesn't include things like Bahrain, which are by default not active. And you can then use that list to go and do things. So what is JMESPath and what can you do with it? It is utterly incredible what you can do here. So this is, I'll go to the JMESPath tutorial, which has lots of great examples, many of which are from AWS. And it's giving you an example. If you have an output thing such as this JSON, you can say, give me element A, which will return foo. Or if I want element B, it will return bar, or C will return baz. So it's a way of saying, extract an element from JSON for me, which is exactly what the CLI is doing. You can do nested values. So within A, there is B, there is C, there is D, and you get the value out. You can return the 1th element, which is this one here, out of the array. It's 0 based. You can reference arrays. So here we have A contains B contains C, which is a list, which contains D, which is a dictionary, which has an element D, which has an array, etc. You can slice things up. So just give me the first 5 elements. Some really neat things. And as we go through here, you'll start to see some AWS examples. Where do we have some here? Here we have one. So, this should look familiar. Reservations, instances, state. So it's pretty much like I was doing there. It said, go through all of these reservations, go through each of the instances and return the state that is there. So, it looks like that's interesting. There are 2, it's a list of dictionaries and multiple values in the dictionary have that. You can then go and do more fancy things, such as only show me machines which have a state equal to running and show me their name. So let's give this a go. If I go back to my thing here, AWS EC2 describe instances, and let's start by just getting the name. So if I go and say query, what are we doing? Reservations, instances. You don't always have to do the star. Name. Let's do instance ID. So this will give me all of the instance IDs, and there's a few of them there. However, not all of them are running. So we've got, how many machines here? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 instances returned to me, but not all of them are running. So how can I say only show me the running ones? Now, those of you familiar with the AWS CLI know you can add a -- filter and say where state equals running, but you can actually do it within the query as he demonstrated. So we're going to say get every instance, but only instances where the state is running. Now, this will be slightly, this probably won't work. The state is running. We have some EC2 instances here. One is not running. It's called 5E. 5E. So that should not appear. Let's do another listing to see what should have come from here. Probably got the wrong path. Stopped. Okay. So here we are, it's the state. So it is instances.state.name. Let's try and feed that in. Instances state.name equals running. And I hope that that works. And I got that wrong. Instances. Always test things before you try it. Here is a state. State or other instances should be running. Running. Anyone figured out what I've done wrong here? Name state, capital S, name. Ah. That should probably work. Running. Where question mark state name equals running. It's brought up none of them. Oh well. Let's see. JMESPath state name running. Let's see if somebody else has figured out how to do this. State name examples. I'm awesome. Thanks, BDS guy, except I'm not awesome when things aren't working. Oh, we've got something in the docs. State name. So it is officially state name. Might be the quote that's going wrong here. So JMESPath has a bit of funny stuff where it puts things in quotes. So let me try and change this to a backtick and wrap it in a single quote. Aha! Yes, JMESPath has this really funny syntax of using a backtick to identify strings, which upsets Linux because it thinks you're including a command, so you then have to wrap the whole thing in a single quote that fixes it up. So I can now say the same thing, but give me stopped, and it should be about 2 instances. Great. So this is a really interesting use of the query parameter, not just to say what you want out, but we've effectively put an if statement in there. Now, a more advanced version of this is retrieving tags. Thanks, Jelly. So an EC2 instance, oh, I didn't quote it. An EC2 instance has tags. So let's say I want to know the name of an instance with a certain, let's say I just want to extract the name of the instances. And we know that names are not a field on the EC2 object itself. It's a tag where the tag equals name and the value is the name of the instance. So how do we do this? Pretty similar. You can come in and say, retrieve me the instances with, in fact, AWS CLI tags query name. On Stack Overflow. See, I'm cheating. I'm trying to find my previous answers on Stack Overflow, and we might be able to find them here. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, here it is. Tags question mark where the key equals the name. This was from A. Taylor back in 2016. Thank you, A. Taylor. Let's give it that a go ourselves. So I will paste that in. All the instances, let's get that syntax right. Instances dot show me the tag where the key equals name. Talk about live coding. It's live CLI debugging. So fantastic. It's come out with all the tags where it's showing me the name tag. So it's not showing me one like this where there's a tag called cleanup. Now, if I only want to show the actual name, I can then modify it And let's say it has found the tag, and now I can just say output the value of the tag. And it has come out with the names of all of those instances. And then you could say things like only the instance with this particular name, go and retrieve it. So it's a great way of referencing resources by tag rather than specifically by value. So some rather neat things. And I think I even had some questions that we could relate here. What do I consider the second row? Switch CLI, backup. Get active network interfaces. Oh, this was a nice one. This was something else that I thought was very handy with JMESPath. So this is an older question, but somebody said, how can I count how many network interfaces I have attached to my machine? And this is really neat. It queries, instead of just querying and saying, show me my network interfaces, you can run a function. And this function says, give me the length of the array, which is network interfaces. So it is effectively returning a count of the number of those elements. You can also do this for S3 to figure out the size of buckets. So AWS S3 ls my stack big one bucket. We have these two files. I would like to know the total file size that I'm taking in S3. And to do that, you can use the AWS CLI list objects. Actually, I'll go for V2. If it's newer, it must be better. So one thing to notice about the AWS CLI, when you use S3, sometimes you use this S3 thing here where you say S3. That gives you the simple commands like ls, copy, sync. Or you might use this S3 API command, which gives you more low-level commands, the one-to-one things. And list objects will list the object, the contents of bucket. So AWS S3 API list bucket, list objects v2 bucket is stack big one. So this has given me a JSON format of that listing. Instead of having to extract these sizes from text and having to manipulate, it's now coming back with the size field. So I can come in here and say, fantastic, I now want to query the contents and give me the size of them coming back, which is great. And now, hopefully, I can wrap this in a sum command and come back, and it's going mad at me. Size, unexpected token. I think I have to wrap it in a single quote. And fantastic. It has now instantly come back with a count of the total number of bytes of the contents of my S3 bucket. So JMESPath is amazing. All of these functions and things you can do to it just opens up your mind of the various things you can do. So I highly recommend you have a play with the JMESPath tutorial. Let's shove that in the chat. And some of it gets a bit too hard in my head, like this. He's got piping commands that do things. So people first. So he gets the first name of all the people, and of that resulting array of first names, he then gets the 0th element of that array. That's pretty easy. Select multiple values is pretty easy. And here's that function type things where you can do length, max. Oh, which leads me to the last modified. Let's do that one. We should be able to finish on that. And I think last modified, here it is. So you can do cute things like this. Somebody was saying, how can I get the last modified object from S3 using the CLI? And lots of people came up with things saying, oh, you can recurse and you can sort and you can do all these things. But the really nice answer is something like this. Exactly what I did. Query sort by. So you could say sort by the last modified date. So let's see if we can do that. Sort by contents last modified. Query sort by last modified. So one object here was created at 019. This was created at 028. So it's giving it to me in order. If I was to try and reverse it by wrapping a reverse function around it, it should now come out in the reverse order. The 28 is coming before the 19. So you can manipulate the order of things that are coming out there. And if I sort by that and then say only give me the last element, so this is using Python type syntax, -1 means the last element of the list, then it will return me the object that has the greatest last modified date. So you can literally say, list me the last file modified. You could then grab the key. I could then say, grab me the key of that object instead, put it in output of text format, and you could then include that in a copy command. So you could say, copy that command to this destination. It will always copy the most recent file that is obtained there. So JMESPath, wonderful stuff. Go out and try it. Not only is there the JMESPath tutorial, there is also a section here with lots of examples. Find me people with ages greater than 20. Retrieve their name. So amazing stuff that you can do in here. And there's full specifications and things in there. So give JMESPath a try as you go. So thank you for joining me today on looking at lots of questions. Looks like we did some heavy S3 and CLI type commands, but always things to learn. And they just came out of questions that I looked at this morning and found interesting topics on there. So I encourage you all to hop on to Stack Overflow. At the very least, if you end up doing a web search and you land on Stack Overflow and it helped you, please log in, click that little up arrow. So whenever you see a question in here, you can come in and say, yes, that particular thing worked very well. I don't want to upvote my own answer. I will upvote the question instead. You can just tick on that and say, yes, that's a very good question. I encourage you to do that. Just needs you to log in and register. See if you can answer any questions, which would be really great out there. And please, if you do answer any questions, drop me a note. I'd love to find out about it, or let me know next week on the stream. Thank you, Jelly, D2, Assassin. I'm glad you enjoyed it. So yeah, this is like live coding, but it's live Stack Overflow answering, I guess. I haven't seen anyone else doing it out there. Thanks, BSD guy. Thanks for the stream. Stay safe, stay home, and I'll see you all again next week. So if you want to join in about 1.5 and 3/4 hours ago from wherever you're watching this today, though I'll probably move it one day earlier come June. So thank you very much and cheers. Bye-bye.